Hello and welcome to the project management tutorials. In today's session, we are going to talk about project management fundamentals. So I welcome you all to this session. In today's session, we are going to discuss about some of the topics which are very fundamental in project management, starting with what is project, the difference between project, program, and portfolio, what is project management terminologies, project management phases, and knowledge areas. So I welcome you all to the session and thank you for subscribing to this PM tutorial. Let's get started with the basic definition of a project. So let's understand what is a project. So project is nothing but a temporary endeavor that we undertake, and when we complete a project successfully, what we get as an outcome is nothing but a product, service, or some result. So as per PMP definition, the project is anything which is a temporary endeavor undertaken to produce a unique product, service, or a result. So when you work on any project, what you get at the end of that project? You may be working on a project to produce or to get some product, or you may be working on a project in order to come up with some service offering to the customers, or you may be working on a project so that you'll get some results by the end of that project. Now this is predefined. If you are working on an IT product, then you already decide that okay, you are building an IT product maybe for recruitment. So you want to launch a product in the market which will help recruitment agencies to work properly, to work effectively, to work efficiently, so that they can source the candidate and they can complete the end-to-end recruitment process effectively. So that's the product that you want to launch in the market. So you undertake a project which will help you to launch that product. And of course, when you undertake that project, you go through various phases of the project, which we are going to talk about soon. But most importantly, there are certain things that we need to remember here. When we work on any project, of course, we go through sequence of tasks, and these tasks are planned very well in advance. And of course, we perform these tasks based on the plan that we have created. And all this happens at the beginning of the project itself during the planning stage. Even we have also defined what are we going to get by the end of the project. So as I mentioned, it's predefined. The IT product for recruitment that you're going to get as a part of this project or as a result of this project is already predefined. So the deliverables are predefined in the project. There is always a fixed deadline. That's very important. So on a project, we always work against a given deadline. So you may decide that I want to launch that recruitment product by the end of 2018 December. So some deadline is already agreed upon when you start working on any project. And there is a predefined budget as well, which is given to you. So there may be sponsors of that project who will give you some predefined budget, and then you start working on that project in order to produce that IT product, which is going to help recruitment agencies to complete their end-to-end recruitment cycle. Let's go ahead and find out some of the attributes of a successful project. When do we say my project is successful? There are certain attributes that we can certainly think of. One is, of course, it's planned and organized approach. Whenever we undertake any project, it's a planned approach. It's an organized approach. And that's precisely why we apply the project management principles and practices when we undertake any project. So to build on the same example, when I'm working on this IT product, what am I doing essentially? I'm basically trying to find out the need of the recruitment agencies in the market. So for that, I might need to reach out to so many of them to find out what are they looking into an IT product. I might need to launch a sort of something called as MVP, minimal viable product. And once I launch that MVP in the market, I can take feedback from the recruitment agencies. And based on that feedback, I can actually build on it further. So all these activities that we undertake in project, all of them are planned and organized properly. So that is one of the attribute of a successful project. It's a team commitment. The most important thing when you start working on a project, it's important that we need to align everybody's vision to ultimately what exactly are you going to build in that project. So team commitment is very important. So team commitment will come only when you align that vision of the project and ensure that everybody knows what exactly are they building, where exactly are they contributing. So successful project will have tremendous team commitment. Everybody knows what they are building. Everybody knows which is the product, what they're building at the end of that project. It's proper time management. Since we're talking about a project management, so obviously when we are talking about a successful project, it's properly time managed. So you create a good plan, you ensure that plan is executed effectively, it's monitored, it's controlled effectively, so that at the end of the project, what you get is not only a successful product, but also you have completed that project within a given timeline. That is the key. Resource optimization. As I mentioned, when you begin working on any project, it's basically the sponsor who will be giving you some funds at the beginning. The sponsor will also give you some resources. It could be people resources, or it could be other material resources, machineries, etc., depending on the project that you're working on. So when you apply the effective project management practices, and when the project is successful, obviously you will also ensure that all these resources are optimally utilized. So you will order the material only when it is required. You will not unnecessarily pile up the inventory of material. So that means you will not only use your funds effectively, but also you plan in such a way that funds are being utilized in the project when they are really required to be utilized. Result monitoring. When you start working on the project, a successful project will always have effective monitoring of the results. And that is possible when you go on analyzing the project data as and when you go on working on that project. So you will use various tools to make sure the result monitoring is happening. And if there has to be any alignment or any correction, preventive and corrective actions which have to be taken, then you take that exactly at the right time, so that you can ensure that your project is aligned to the ultimate vision and, most importantly, the plan that you have created. So continuous monitoring is very important attribute of a successful project. And by the end of that project, obviously you will achieve a better customer satisfaction. So a successful project will always achieve a better customer satisfaction because you have executed that project well within time, well within budget, by optimally utilizing the resources. Not only that, you managed the project risk effectively. All the issues on the project are closed properly. The handover in the projects are done to the operations team and the team who is actually going to manage your product or a service or a result, so that effectively handover has also been done. So all these things have been taken care of. So that means definitely some of these attributes of a successful project, you can look into that project that you worked upon. So moving from here to next important part. So when we talk about some of the basic fundamentals in project management, we need to also understand about the project life cycles. Now, project life cycle is certainly not cyclical life cycle, but it is sequential life cycle. So typically you would find whenever we begin working on any project, we always perform some of the initial project activities. So right from maybe identifying an opportunity for the project, and from there it will start, a business case will be built. And once we have a business case approval, then your sponsor, who is going to be actually the one who has some funds approved, who can then allocate that fund to the team, to the project manager. And obviously, that's how the project journey starts. So there is always something called as initiating phase when we actually begin the project. And that is a phase where some of these activities that I mentioned just now happens. So once your project is approved, once the budget is approved, then the actual project kickoff happens. Once the project manager is assigned to the project, then there is a proper kickoff meeting that is conducted by the project manager, and that's from where the project actually kicks off. Then your team starts working on the requirements. And once we have requirements for the project ready, let's take a quick example. Let's say you're talking about digitization in bank. So there is a bank and they want to digitize their customer experience. So they see that as an opportunity and they identify somebody who can sponsor this project. So some senior leader they identify within that bank who can sponsor this project. So obviously somebody will be given the task to work on the business case, how the digitization in banking will help them. So maybe they would like to digitize few forms which are otherwise filled up physically by the customers. When they come to the branch, they have to physically fill up those forms, and that consumes a lot of time, as well as that also consume unnecessarily money as well to prepare those forms, print those forms, maintain those forms, etc., etc. So from there, the journey starts. So just understand the opportunity, how the opportunity gets identified for any project. So once the sponsor approves that business case for digital experience to the customer in the bank, then the project journey starts. So then they appoint a project manager, they empower the project manager, and then project managers creates the plan, and then journey of the project starts. So the first important thing that of course happen is all the initiating activities. So once the initiating activities are in place, then the team starts gathering requirements. Based on the requirements, high level design is created, which is again approved by your customers. Detailed design is created, which is also walked through your customers. The feedback is taken into consideration. And once it is approved, then you actually start the coding activities. So that's where the development work will start for your digital experience to your customer project that you are working on. And once the coding completes, then you start the testing. So of course, you will be using various tools for testing, and you will do the proper testing by writing the test cases, etc. And once you're sure that what you have built is working as per the expectations and specifications given by the customers, then of course you do the installations or implementation, and then the support activities will begin from there. So what is important in this entire example is to understand the project activities are sequential, and they are actually sequential in nature as far as the phases or life cycle is concerned, and they are not cyclical. Let's quickly understand the difference between project, program, and portfolio. To do that, we'll take another quick example so that you'll be able to relate it better. So project, as I mentioned, is a temporary endeavor undertaken to produce a unique product solution. It could be again in the form of a service, or it could be some result that you want to produce by the end of that project. So you are working for a company and they decide to launch a learning app for school education. So as a part of the strategic decision that the company has decided, that they would like to basically introduce a new line of business altogether. And that new line of business is K-12 segment learning applications for school education. Of course, for that, they will undertake certain market research projects to find out how is the potential to introduce or to do such a business. And once they are sure about it, of course, this is their portfolio now. They are entering into an education portfolio through this strategic decision that they have taken at an organization level. Through market research, they get a confidence that yes, it's good to go ahead and introduce this business or get into this business. And then they come up with different programs which will in turn help them in establishing that portfolio. So they would then categorize different programs. It could be marketing program through which they will undertake various smaller projects, like for example, product launch project. It would not be a smaller really, but yes, product launch could be a separate project altogether, which will be undertaken within marketing program. Then new market development. So they will identify where all they want to identify the new market, how they're going to expand, etc. Similarly, application development will be another program they will introduce, under which they can have projects like web application development, iOS application development, Android application development, etc. And because this is a education program, so they need also content for their education application. So for that, they will introduce a separate program altogether for that, and they would have the content creation for the class 1, class 2, etc. So this is how the projects will get rolled into programs, and the programs and project again will get rolled up into a portfolio. So this will cover the definition of what is a project. A program would be then a group of interrelated projects. As you can see here, under marketing program, you will have a couple of these marketing projects. Similarly, the application development program will have similar kind of projects. So it's a group of projects, which is nothing but your program. And portfolio is collection of your projects and operations, which are managed under one group. And typically you will find portfolios are introduced as a result of some strategic goal. So in this case, the strategic goal was to come or to launch a new line of business. And that's what was decided by this organization. So this is what happens in project, program, and portfolio. So I can see there is one question over here. And this question is from Swati, and she's trying to clarify about the portfolio. All right. So let me just repeat what is portfolio. So as I mentioned here, in this above example, the portfolio is basically the company is now going to venture into a new portfolio of education. And under that education as a portfolio, now they are trying to launch some of the various programs through which they can introduce this learning app for school education. So under this portfolio, they are running various projects, they're running various programs. So all these programs and projects put together will help them in growing this portfolio of education and in turn achieving the strategic objectives that they have decided at the organization level. So I hope this clarifies your question, Swati. All right, thank you for that confirmation. Okay, so let's move from here to very quickly we'll understand about project management then. So project management discipline is very important whether you're working in projects or you're not working in projects, because project management discipline will help you in understanding about various principles of approaching a project, planning a project, etc. Various techniques. So how to do estimation on project, how to derive budget, or how to break down the larger tasks into smaller ones, how to create a work breakdown structure, etc. There are various tools, the project management tools. Tools again could be for estimation or tools for workflow management, or for that matter, there are various tools which could also be used for better collaboration, effective communication, etc. So project management is all about applying that knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to the project activities. So once you have a project in hand, and once you learn about the principles of project, tools and techniques and knowledge and skills, then you have to start applying all of that to a project that you're working on. And that's nothing but your project management. Now, why the project management is required altogether? So project management is required so that we'll be able to plan properly, we'll be able to schedule properly. Now just think about this. When you're working with a sponsor, obviously sponsor is the one who has given you funds to do a project. So sponsor will always ask you that tell us when this project is going to be completed successfully. When is my first milestone going to be achieved? When is my second milestone going to be achieved? So without having a proper plan and a schedule, we'll not be able to go back to the sponsor and explain when the actual project is going to be delivered, when the operations activities will start, what are some of the key milestones that we'll be achieving on the project, etc. So for that, you need to know about project management. For efficient task and resource management. So as I mentioned, the organization has given you access to a lot of resources. At the same time, they have also given you people as, of course, one of the resources who are working with you on various tasks. So unless you know effective project management, you'll not be able to optimally utilize these resources in order to produce the outcome that you're working for. Another important area, why do we need to know the project management, is because synchronized workflow of team. Now, when team members are working on any project, they may be working either from one location or from multiple locations. It's very important to synchronize this work. And if you'll not be able to synchronize this work, you'll not be able to then ascertain what's going on the project. So project management knowledge, tools and techniques will actually help you in integrating this together, in synchronizing this workflow of the team and doing a proper monitoring and controlling so that we can achieve the project objectives which are predefined and committed to your sponsor. Shared documents, calendars, and contacts. So project management is also required in order to produce certain documents. And those documents are important even from regulatory and compliance point of view. If you're working on a project which is SOX compliant, or if you're working on a project from some healthcare industry and there are certain healthcare compliance which you need to adhere to. Now, when the audit happens, then obviously how would they know whether you adhered to those compliance or not? Obviously through some of these documents that you have produced. Now, you need to know which documents to produce, when to produce them, what are the standard templates that we need to adhere to. So all this knowledge will come from your project management background. Contacts and calendars are equally important when you're scheduling the meetings, when you're facilitating workshops, at the same time when you are doing the communication to your stakeholders and your team. So for that effective communication, and so that everybody will perceive you an organized project manager, because you know what is project management and you're applying that, it's important to know first what is that. Accurate project tracking. Project tracking is very important for effective monitoring and controlling. So for that also, we need to know the project management. So for what we have covered. So we have started with the, of course, agenda items. Then we covered about what is a project, the difference between project, program, and portfolio. And we took a couple of examples there as well. Apart from that, we had also gone through the project management life cycle. And just now we covered the importance of project management. let's move to the next topic then and understand some of the basic project management terminologies. I'm sure you must have a lot of questions around some of these terminologies as well. Let's go one by one, starting with methodology. So what is methodology? You must have come across various methodologies. For example, software development lifecycle or waterfall methodology. So waterfall is a method in which you'll find there are certain principles, there are certain rules, there are certain ways of doing things mentioned. And there is a structure when we do something. So methodology is all about those principles, rules, guidelines, structure, and doing something in a particular way which is defined in that method. So it gives us an approach to managing project effectively. So there are various methodologies. You can take example of the waterfall methodology, or you can take example of iterative and incremental methods of developing software, or agile. Under agile, there are various methodologies. Like for example, Scrum, there is Kanban, there is extreme programming. We also have methodologies like feature-driven development, right? We also have methods like dynamic system development methodology. So these are nothing but methodologies which actually gives us an approach and idea about how to go about managing the project effectively. So on a project when we work, we use some methodologies. What is requirements? Requirements is nothing but what my customer look for into the product or service or the result that I'm working on. So once my idea of working on a project is approved, once the funds are allocated to the project, I start working on requirements. And requirement is one of the important phase of the project because that's the phase wherein I interact with my customers, end users, stakeholders, and find out what they are looking into that product. So if you take the example of that IT recruitment or just a recruitment consultant software that you're working on or that you're producing out of that project, then you will interact with those agencies and find out what are they looking into that product and what features should I build on into that product. So you basically interact with all these people, and while doing that, you'll be using various techniques. You will do prototyping, you will do wireframes, you will do facilitated workshops, you will do interviews, you will do surveys. So all these things you will do, and you will try to gather requirements about that product that you're working on. And then you create a requirement specification document. And then you will circulate across to all the stakeholders so that they would know what they are building into that product. The next terminology is WBS, which is work breakdown structure. Now, work breakdown structure, the name itself says that here is where we actually break down those requirements into activities and tasks. So work breakdown structure can be created differently. Now, there is a question here. Let me just see. And John is asking this question, and this question is about, is there an example of a work breakdown structure and how it is actually created? So that's a good question. I must agree, because sometimes there could be a confusion around how to create a WBS. So let me give you a very quick example of how to create a WBS. Now, as you can see on the screen, we have a project, and this project is broken down into various phases. So phases could be requirement phase, design phase, development phase, testing phase, etc. And those phases are then further broken down into various tasks and work packages. And that work package will then be broken down into activities. So in a work breakdown structure, typically you'll find this kind of work breakdown structure, which is based on phases, or you could have the work breakdown structure based on some other approaches. It could be based on the approach, which is a product approach. Now, this is approach, which is a phase level approach. So depending on what approach have you decided, you can actually use that high level template and create the work breakdown structure. So as you can see here in this structure, you have actually broken down your phases into various work packages, and those work packages are broken down into activities. So if requirement is a phase that you're working on, so requirement gathering could be one of the things that you will be doing in the form of activities. And what you will be working as a work package could be to create the requirement specification document. So that's how you will break it down into various activities, and will be then activities further could be broken into various tasks as well. So that's a quick on work breakdown structure, how you can create it. I hope this must have given you some high level idea. And when you'll attain the PMP training, that's where we talk about these things in detail, and we take several examples, and we actually go through various ways to create WBS as well. Moving to the next topic, which is milestone. Now, what is milestone? Milestones are nothing but some significant event that has happened while developing something. So it could be you're developing a product and you want to identify what are those significant events that have taken place, which I would like to take into consideration while sharing the status of this product development. So you could take any examples. So again, very quickly, I'm just going to show you milestones and how do they look like. So as you can see here, you created some plan and you have this kind of a plan, project timelines. So you have clubbed together, for example, for concept development, system design, detail design, etc. So these are your milestones. And then you have put some timelines there. So milestone 1, milestone 2, milestone 3. And then once you complete milestone 1, that means you're actually going to complete your concept development, right? Which will involve various activities like market analysis, feasibility study, prototyping, cost estimate, etc. So once you complete these activities, by the end of it, you'll be able to complete milestone number 1. Similarly, system design milestone will be completed when you complete some of the key activities like architecture, creating a high level architecture, or defining subsystems, or refining the design further, and of course doing the make or buy decision. Then you'll be able to complete the milestone number 2. So likewise, you have certain significant event within your development work that you would like to put together so that you can actually call them as milestones, and you go on completing those milestones one by one. You go on reporting those milestone accomplishments with your stakeholders, and that also helps stakeholder understand the progress of the project. The next topic is about baseline. What is baselining? Baselining is nothing but when we take sign off on requirement specification document, or the budget that is being approved, or the schedule that is being approved. So once we baseline it, if there is any change, then it has to go through a change control board. So if there is any requirement, we just spoke about requirements. So your team, the project team, will spend good amount of time in talking to the stakeholders. They will use various techniques to gather requirements. And once all that is done, then you will document your requirements. And the document is signed off. You take sign off from your customers. Now, if anything changes beyond that or after that, then it has to go through a change control process, which is already defined. So what is baseline? So that means my requirements are now baselined. Similarly, I baseline my plan. And if any changes have to happen to that baseline plan, then it has to follow a separate process. So that's my baseline actually. Moving to the Gantt charts. Now Gantt charts is another popular tool which is used on the project. Let's take a quick example of a Gantt chart so that you will understand how does it look like. Now typically Gantt charts are very useful for us if we have to understand the dependencies of the activities, if we have to understand the various activities on the project and their duration and how they are over the period of time in terms of the timelines of those activities, the dependencies, who is working on that, etc., etc. Plus it also shows you milestones apart from that. So as you can see on the screen, for Gantt charts, we have market research activity, define specifications, overall architecture, etc. So these are the activities that are being performed on the project. So wherever you have got key milestones like project planning is completed, so that's my key milestone. So I have highlighted that differently. So milestone 1, milestone 2, milestone 3, likewise, you will highlight those milestones separately. And with this, I would know when that activity is going to start, when that activity is going to end. So for example, software development will start or begin on 4th of October. It will end on 8th of November. And I will be able to also achieve a milestone number 3 by the end of that. So Gantt charts will give us an idea about list of activities that are performed on the project. What is the duration required for those activities? What are the dependencies? What are milestones? Since these activities are plotted against the timelines, and hence it's very, very effective tool. The another topic is about CCB, which is Change Control Board. I mentioned to you about requirements gathering, baselining. So Change Control Board will come into picture whenever anything that you're doing which is beyond the baseline. So if requirement is baselined and now if change is introduced in the project, then it has to go through a change control board. Now in change control board, you will have various stakeholders. Of course, you'll have a project sponsor, you will have a requester of the change, then you will have the representation from the IT side as well. And then all the stakeholders come together and they understand, they ascertain if we implement this change at that stage, what will be the impact of that change on schedule of the project, budget of the project, overall risk, whether risk will go up or how would that have an impact on that, resources, etc. So once they understand the impact of that change, then they decide whether to approve that change or reject that change. So change control board is where the fate of the change is decided in a way. So it's very important to have the change control board, and we have to have the change control board meetings happening periodically so that we can present change to the change control board and share the impacts and take their buy-in so that we can decide whether to incorporate the change in the project or not. The another terminology that you will keep hearing a lot on project is stakeholder. Now on project, you will come across various stakeholders. Stakeholders could be anybody who is positively or negatively impacted by the project. Right from the sponsor of the project to the team members, you will come across many people or agencies or vendors, or for that matter, small companies whom we deal with. All those are your stakeholders who are getting positively or negatively impacted. If you're working on an IT application, you will need to also factor in which are those upstream systems who are feeding you the data, which are those downstream systems whom you are sending the data, who are the users of the application. So there will be n number of stakeholders, and you need to know who are those stakeholders and how you're going to manage them effectively. Another term is issues. So issues is something, now if you compare issues with risk is a future event, and issue is something that has already occurred. So on the project, sometimes you may face issues. Like for example, you are in a testing phase, the test data hasn't yet received or not loaded in the test environment, or the data which is loaded is not relevant. So you need to replace that data. So you are already into a problem, right? That issue has already occurred. Now, because that issue has already occurred, so you need to then manage it effectively. The correct test data is not loaded in the test environment. If that's the issue that you're facing, then you need to reach out to the right people and ensure that you replace the current data with the right data so that you can kick off your testing. So there is a way to manage issue, and there is an issue tracker where you need to upload that issue, track it there. Risk mitigation. As I mentioned, risk is a future event, and you may face a lot of risk on the project. Again, there is a risk tracker that we have, risk and issue log, we call it as. And of course, there is a risk log separate where we log all these risks. And there we need to also put about mitigation. How are you going to mitigate that risk? If you're working on any new story or new requirement and you're not sure about that, you might need to do more testing so that you are confident that this new requirement you have developed successfully. So mitigation could be done differently. Mitigation actually helps in reducing the impact of that risk. So as I mentioned, you're working on a new requirement and you're not very confident about it. One of the mitigation strategy that you decided was to increase the number of testing or test coverage or do more tests. So if that is a mitigation plan that you have decided, then obviously you need to accordingly implement on that plan so that you can mitigate that risk. Otherwise, what will happen? Once you put that feature into production, and if it doesn't work properly, you will have a lot of production issues. So you'll have to ensure that you mitigate risk properly. Triple constraints of the project. So in project management, typically, we used to talk about triple constraints in the beginning. Now there are more than 3 constraints, of course. But initially, we used to focus on 3 constraints, which is budget, scope, and schedule. So why they are constraints? Because even if you change one, at least other one will get affected. Let's take a scenario. You started working on the project, and if the budget of the project has been reduced by 10%, then obviously it will have an impact on your scope. Or if the scope is increased, then obviously it will have impact on your schedule, or it will have impact on your budget. So triple constraints are very important to manage effectively as a project manager. RAG status. On project, when you start communicating about the project progress, stakeholders will ask about the RAG status or RAG status of the project. So is it red, green, or amber? So if your project is running as per the plan that you have agreed upon, that means it is certainly green. If it is behind the schedule, if it is over budget, so that means obviously depending on the severity, you can certainly flag it as red or flag it as amber. So it's very important for us to identify the right project status and communicate that so that stakeholders would know the status of the project and they will be able to accordingly respond to your requests, or if there is anything that needs to be escalated, that will get addressed on time. Moving from there, now let's talk about project management phases and knowledge areas. So let's quickly go through project management phases first. As I mentioned earlier, there are various phases in the project management, starting with initiation phase, and that's where we talk about making decisions about initiation phase by identifying project whether we can realistically do it or not. And we took one example of digital banking in earlier slide already. So all those opportunity identification, coming up with the business case, approving the business case, and then setting up the project team, etc., all that happen as a part of the initiation. And once we have the approval, we start working on planning phase, and this is where your plan gets prepared based on the initial requirements that you have gathered. And based on that scope, initial requirement, you come up with the budget required for the project, how long would it take, etc. And then you start communicating that. So once everybody is on the same page about what's happening on the project, then you start executing that project. So all the resources who are working on the project will pick up their tasks and start executing their tasks. Now, while execution of the project is happening, it's equally important to monitor and control the project. So I wouldn't say monitoring and controlling is a separate phase. Please understand that monitoring and controlling will be there throughout the project. So I would not call this as a phase. These things are more like I would say, process groups. These are not truly a phases, but these are more like a process groups. Closing. So again, closing is another phase where what we do typically is that we close all the activities that we have been doing. So we do proper handover to the operations team and support team. At the same time, we ensure that vendor, if there are any contracts, those are getting closed properly. If the team is there, then we ensure that the team activities, so in terms of adjourning activities, are happening properly. So all those things will be a part of project closure typically. So these are nothing but the process groups, I would call it as mainly initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Now talking about knowledge areas, now why these knowledge areas we are covering? Because as per PMBOK, there are these 10 knowledge areas that you need to study when you will appear for PMP certification examination. And as a part of PMP training, we cover all these knowledge areas in well detail. So there is a question out there, and this question is from Swati, and she is actually asking about hearing the various processes. So I completely agree with you. There are different processes as well. In fact, thank you for bringing that, Swati. There are 49 processes in total. And these 49 processes and these 10 knowledge areas, apart from that, there are process groups, which I just now covered. These are process groups, which we covered just now, 5 of them. All this put together, is your PMBOK guide. So all of that is a part of your PMBOK. So let's just quickly talk about this. Procurement management will cover about everything related to vendor engagement and the procurement activities, material, resources, etc. Stakeholder management will talk about how to manage stakeholders effectively. There are various processes that we complete, whom to manage closely, whom to inform, etc. Integration management is another important one, which will ensure that all the project activities are integrated properly. So we again follow some processes for that. Cost management will help us in not only deriving the budget of the project, but also to make sure that what are some of the ways through which we can monitor and control that. Quality management, again, what is my quality approach on the project? How I can make sure the quality output is delivered. Schedule management will help us in deriving the schedule of the project and ensuring that we define those milestones explicitly. Scope management again helps in identifying and gathering requirements and putting that together to derive the scope of the project. Communication management again comes up with the communication plan, how to coordinate with all the stakeholders and communicate the progress of the project, as well as if escalations are required to be done, how to do that. Resource management will help us in managing various resources, right from people resources to material resources, machineries, etc. And risk management, we can define our risk management approach there in order to execute or in order to implement the qualitative and quantitative risk assessments and how to come up with the risk mitigation or risk response strategy, etc. Apart from the 10 knowledge areas, as I mentioned, there are 49 processes. And as you can see now here on the screen, so we have got these 10 knowledge areas, and for each of these knowledge areas, there are defined processes. So if you count them, there are 49 of them. Let's just quickly glance through this, starting with integration management. And this is one of the biggest one. What do we do typically as a part of integration? We come up with a project charter. Again, very important. from the project manager point of view because it empowers the project manager. We develop the project management plan here. Then we come up with direct and manage project work. So while executing, we need to know what work is to be performed and then how to do monitoring and controlling activities. Perform change control. If there is any change introduced on the project, that's what we follow then. And we have to close the project effectively as a part of integration as well. So integration management cut across all the process group: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Cut across all the process groups. As a part of scope management, again, right from planning the scope activities to how to collect requirements, how to define scope, how to come up with the work breakdown structure, how to validate the scope items, and go on controlling the scope effectively so that there is no scope creep. As a part of time management, we come up with how to do the schedule or management on the project, how we can define activities, sequence them, estimate the activity duration, and then that will help us in developing the schedule of the project, and then we then control the schedule. As a part of cost, again, based on the plan that we've created, we estimate the cost, we determine budget based on that, and then we start controlling that. Under quality, we decide our quality management plan, and then we manage quality effectively. We control quality as well through various activities. Under human resource, we ensure that the human resource plan is created. I would say it's a resource management now. It's not a human resource management really. And everything related to resource management would be a part of that knowledge area. Under communication, right from creating a communication plan to managing that and ensuring that effective communication is happening. As about a procurement, what we ensure is that the procurement management plan is first created, and then we conduct control procurement activities, etc., and closing of the procurement, which will involve closing the contracts, etc. Under risk, as I mentioned, so we create the plan first where we can define our approach, and then we start working on how to identify risk, qualitative, quantitative risk analysis, as I mentioned, and then come up with the risk response for each of the risks identified in the risk log, and then monitoring the risk closely so that we have a better control over risks. And then stakeholder, that's where we identify stakeholders, manage them effectively, and we create a stakeholder engagement plan. So all these 49 processes are very, very important for us to understand, and we cover that as a part of the PMP training program in details. So this covers everything that we're supposed to be covering as a part of today's webinar. I once again thank you all for participating in today's session, and I'm sure some of your basic questions related to the project management must have got answered. Since in today's session, we spoke about the definition of project, program, portfolio. Not only that, we spoke about the life cycle of project. We covered different project phases. We also covered from the PMP exam point of view, the 10 knowledge areas, 49 process groups, and the 5 different process groups, 49 processes, 5 different process groups. So all of that is covered at a very high level. Most importantly, we also covered some of the basic yet important terminologies that you need to know while working on the project. So thank you once again for joining this session, and I wish you all the best.